Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. I'm Gloria Perez, President and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, and I am so delighted to welcome you to this important conversation today that we are co-hosting as a Women's Foundation with the Aspen Institute's Forum on Women and Girls. We have some brilliant leaders joining us in just a moment to discuss how this election's most pressing issues impact women, girls, and families. As we begin, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we in Minneapolis are on the traditional land of the Dakota people. As the first statewide women's foundation, at the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, we are dedicated to advancing gender and racial equity as we ensure that all women and girls across our state can thrive. As we process the results of the presidential election and look at races up and down the ticket to local races in our own backyards, from mayors to city council to school board, it's impossible to not be inspired and energized by the women leading in civic engagement, national, state, and local political leadership and grassroots advocacy. In this moment, our country is deeply divided. As an organization that works with the diversity of political views from across the state of Minnesota, we are here today to create a virtual space for community analysis and support of our collective hope in fighting toward gender and racial equity. The incredible leaders on today's panel are going to dive deep into the implications of the political elections and policy on marginalized communities, particularly on women and families, and they're going to take a close look at gender and racial representation in U.S. political leadership. Our goal is to identify our collective opportunities to move to a racial and gender justice agenda so that we can go forward and begin to transform and build a world where all women and girls and their families and communities thrive. As a Latina, I bring my life's experience to this work, and I see so much opportunity for our state and our world to benefit when we invest in what our communities need, not just to survive, but to thrive. As a leader that is committed to gender and racial justice, I know that our state and our country will be greater, more innovative, and more just if we center the lived experiences of women and girls who are most impacted by our inequitable systems, who live at the intersections of identities, who are leading in this moment with vision and strength, bringing their families and communities with them. I hope you will engage in this conversation today by using the Q&A button that will be disabled. The chat is available to you, so if you have questions of the panelists, please share them using the Q&A function. I'm honored to be here with my dear friend and colleague, Anne Mosle, Vice President of Aspen Institute, the Executive Director of Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and co-chair of the Aspen Institute's Forum on Women and Girls. Anne, thank you for being here.
Gloria, thank you so much, and welcome everybody. I think the theme of this powering forward could be not spot on, as we say, and really honored to have such distinguished leaders to guide us in this conversation, really talking about shaping the future and shaping the future for women, for families, with racial and gender justice at the core. I'm welcoming on behalf of myself and Peggy Clark, my co-chair of the Aspen Forum on Women and Girls. We are deeply committed to leveraging the platform of the Aspen Institute in advancing the rights, full political, economic, social participation of women and girls through a lens of intersectionality, and really helping to lift up what are the most critical conversations, solutions, and leaders across gender, generation, race, ethnicity, and geography. We are incredibly honored when the Minnesota Women's Foundation reached out to us about this conversation for a series of reasons. So my extended respect and appreciation for the leadership of Gloria Perez, an Ascend Fellow, as well as the CEO of the foundation, and also Lulit Mora, who is the Vice President of Community Impact and a SOAR Fellow, which is the fellowship program focused at the Aspen Institute on advancing women and girls. When I think about the power and the platform of women's foundations and the power of philanthropy and purse, I just think I encourage all of us to be thinking about how we think about philanthropy and the power of the purse to also fuel the change we're looking for. So I bring that in. There's so many aspects of this election to unpack. And I am delighted that Gloria Riviera will be leading us through a really thoughtful and strategic and hopefully provocative conversation as we think about what were some of the breakthroughs, which just literally the resplendent brilliance and strength of Kamala Harris as our new vice president is just, I think, not to be underappreciated for the sheer power of that and all that she represents as the daughter of a Jamaican father, Indian American mother, and the story and the strength that she brings forward for the country. That is certainly one of my highlights. There are many other degrees of this with the record turnout and where are we in the state of the country? And also, what is the role of women to also really help reshape the dialogue, the sense of power and possibility? So we will dive into that. And Gloria will do formal remarks to introduce our wonderful panelists, but I just wanted to, especially Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, we're so honored to have you join us for the work that you're doing for the state of Minnesota, but also your voice as the highest ranking Native woman holding non-tribal executive office. I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Nikki Petrie, who is the executive director for the Aspen Institute Center for Native American Youth, who is also is with us in this conversation. And I'm sure we'll be hearing from her in a little bit, but Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, thank you so much for being with us on behalf of the Institute. Fatima Goss Graves has been a longtime friend and hero to many, but certainly myself. And in her role as the CEO of the National Women's Law Center, the depth and position of that law center and the leadership of Fatima, whether it's from the national stage, congressionally, White House, or the Supreme Court, as well as on the ground. Fatima, we're just really honored to have you join us as well for this conversation and for the advisory roles that you've played, both in the launching of the SOAR Fellowship, as well as with the work of Ascend on family prosperity. So I just want to do a personal thank you. And Nicole Mason is also was an inaugural Ascend Fellow, which is a fellowship focused on economic mobility for women, children, families, fathers, but really building pathways for economic mobility. And she serves as the CEO of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. I have the privilege of serving on her board, and just then less than a year, looking at how Nicole Mason has taken the Institute for Women's Policy Research to like a whole new level of energy and possibility is nothing short of breathtaking. So it is my honor to just serve as a host with my beloved friend, Gloria Perez. And now I would like to turn the car keys over to Gloria Riviera, who is an esteemed, well-known ABC correspondent from in-depth investigative stories, feature stories across multiple platforms, some ABC Nightly News, Good Morning America, radio platforms. But she has been a good friend to the Aspen Forum on Women and Girls and to all of us, ensuring the right stories, the right voices are really being told. And not only is she a force for on the media stage, she is also working to change and reshape the culture of media and thinking internally about what does it look like from the newsroom out. On her hashtag, on her tweet, I just saw, Gloria, you're a big believer in big ideas. And sure, I think that's the perfect segue. This is a big moment. And so it's some phenomenal women. So thank you, Gloria Riviera, for just your constant voice and vision in bringing the stories out that need to be told. I'd like to officially give the car keys to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. I just want to say I am so looking forward to this conversation. And last week I did have a few minutes where I thought, will we be able to have the conversation in a way that is concrete? And I believe that we are able to have that today. I would like to kick it off with a question. Is the governor with us? If not, I can start with Fatima.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay, good.
Hi.
Good. I don't see your picture from where I am. So welcome to you, and thank you to everyone here for making this happen. I would like to start with a broad topic. I personally am so interested to know the side of your story about where you were from Tuesday all the way through to Saturday, what your thought process was as you saw the results come in, your thoughts on this idea that perhaps it did not go the way we expected it to, although there's a big argument for it went almost exactly the way many people thought it would go. Anyway, we are where we are. What was your experience, and what is your view as an elected official on where we are with these results?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to the Aspen Institute and the Minnesota Women's Foundation, and of course, Gloria for hosting us. And I would also have to just mention, I'm a Rodell Fellow, Anne, so I want to make sure that I get that out there too from the Aspen Institute. Thank you for that. You know, I think all of us have been on a roller coaster of emotions, and I'm from Minnesota, so that's saying a lot when we say roller coaster of emotions. But you know, women, I think on Saturday night, as we watched Kamala Harris walk out on stage in her white suit, and I had my little Anishinaabe, my little girl, my 7-year-old girl in my arms, and was crying, I think, and many of us were across the country. That was a very powerful moment. And, you know, but what we also saw in that same moment, I think, is that folks were, I think you named it, surprised that the results came down the way that they did. And many people expected some kind of landslide. But I do think what this says and what it illustrates, and as an elected official, but also just as a Native woman who exists in the world, I know that systemic racism runs real deep, and that white supremacy is a heck of a drug. And that I think that is what we now need to really grapple with. That just because the election happened and now, you know, we are on our way to have a new president, that all of the trauma and hard work, frankly, that happened during that time, that like now we're good. That is the thing that I feel most nervous about, is that, you know, we miss this moment and do not see the work of Black women in particular, Latinas, Native women. When you look at what happened in Arizona, our folks showed up and showed out. And my big fear is that now we say like, oh gosh, we don't want to talk about issues of race. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. We're going to talk about blue collar jobs, get back to bread and butter issues, and to not include the folks, frankly, who did a tremendous amount of the work to get us to this moment. Much of that labor being the labor of BIPOC women. And so that's what I'm thinking about as an elected official, but also just as a human being in this moment.
Apologies, guys. I was saying, Governor, I think it's so interesting that you mention where the conversation might go from this point onward. And it made me think of asking Fatima, you know, can it go anywhere else? Can we go back to talking about blue collar jobs? Something that's become very clear to me is just how much the support for Donald Trump revealed so nakedly the systemic racism in our country, and to an arguable extent gave voice to that in our country. Can we go anywhere but forward with our eyes fully open to this new reality? Not new, but the reality that has now become so obvious to so many.
Well, I want to begin by saying I have been a little nervous over the last week that there are some folks who push progressive values who are not seeing this period as a win. So the first thing that has to happen as a part of the rejection of the out loud, on purpose, racism and sexism and undermining of our institutions that we have seen and been grappling with, and many of us standing in the breach around over the last 4 years, is naming that that was soundly defeated. And soundly defeated by millions of votes. And that is how we decide things in this country, right? And so that's the first thing I just want to really remind everyone. And it relates to my second point. And that is, how did we get here? What is the story of how we got there? And the story of how we got there was extraordinary organizing around this country, led largely by Black and Latinx women, and the work that has happened on the ground, not just in places like Georgia and Arizona, but in Milwaukee and in Detroit and in Philadelphia, sort of naming that deep work and commitment and expectation, and why people stood in the way of the range of forces that were coming their way, and voted in a pandemic, in a tremendous economic recession, at risk to their lives and health. My 93-year-old mother-in-law in Pennsylvania had to vote in person to drop off her pandemic. She goes nowhere because of this pandemic. She went to vote. So there is something to celebrate in this moment. And that celebration must include a dissecting of the fact that over 70 million people supported Trump. And that dissection doesn't mean that you reorient and abandon the folks who got you here. Instead, it is a clarity moment for people, or should be a clarity moment, people, that if we do not actually, as the Lieutenant Governor said, if we do not actually grapple with meaningfully structural racism in this country, that we will be in a situation where another force by another name is able to play to people's racial fears and incite and wreak havoc in our country. And I just want to make one last point, and that is we have to be super careful with our language, right? There's, you hear this sort of coded efforts to focus on working people, as if working people aren't the same Black and brown, largely women, who organized their families, their communities for change, right? So I actually think we would be better served if people didn't talk about, like, well, what do we do about blue collar, or what do we do about working people? The question is, what do we do about race? And we should just say that.
One of the things that you said was that people went to vote with this range of forces coming at them. And we spent in the media certainly so much time thinking about that. How would people vote? Was it safe to vote in person? How could we make voting ahead of the election as safe as possible? But that idea of forces coming at you takes me right to Nicole Mason and your book, Born Bright, which was so moving and so incredible. And my question for you, Nicole, is, having been what you have been through and standing where you are now, when you look at a Biden-Harris administration and this idea of tradition, because arguably Biden is a traditionalist, right? And these range of forces coming at this administration, what is your take on the best way to handle the biggest issues? And I want to go back to you then, Fatima, before we lose you, about the Supreme Court and the cases coming there.
So when I think about what's ahead of the Biden-Harris administration, I think about those forces that I believe are a bit dark and don't want the conversation to continue, who are now starting to talk about austerity and recentering and bringing the 70 million people who voted for Trump along. And but that just opens us up for renegotiation and also centering the people who have not been the most impacted in the conversation and the work that we've been needing to have happen for many, many decades now. And so I see this as an opportunity for us to really think about bold policies, bold programs that will help the most impacted. And in this moment, it is women of color, it is people of color, it is lower wage workers. Those are the people who are most impacted in this moment. And so I want to center that, and I hope the administration does center that. There was some talk by the president-elect around supporting and lifting those policies that are impacting Black people and communities of color. And so my work is to make sure that he has the space, he has the ideas, he has the policy so that that can happen. I think they're doing a really good job, which I think they're going to have to continue to do, blocking out the noise, both from the media and also the current administration about, having them drive the agenda and shape it, and really turn and listen to the people who, again, brought you to the dance, who got you elected. And I think that's where they should start.
And to go back to Minnesota, I mean, I'm curious about policy. So let's hone in on what happens next and look at Minnesota. So for Gloria and the governor, how does it work from where you stand now on the issues that are most important to your state for women and girls, for gender and pay equity, the whole slate? What is your next step with this administration? Gloria, do you want to go first? You look so eager.
So I'll comment and then ask the Lieutenant Governor to build on that. The Women's Foundation has historically done a report every 2 years on the status of women and girls. And one of the things that is so unique about that is that we disaggregate the data to look really at how the different women and girls across the state are being impacted. And so in thinking about economics, when we're talking about how much women make in comparison to a white male, we really want to center our work on Native and Latinas so that they are experiencing the greatest disparity. And we know if we can center their work, that we will make sure that all women have what they need to thrive. Additionally, in partnership with the governor's office, the Women's Foundation is running a Young Women's Initiative where we are centering young women of color in and across our state to identify the problems and the solutions that exist. And I've been so grateful to this administration because they have been listening through this pandemic to women and girls talking about how they are being impacted. And with the killing of George Floyd, that additional traumatization that they're experiencing has been really important to listen and to help to develop solutions, not from our offices, but rather from what women are saying on the ground. And so I'm excited, despite the fact that we continue to have a divided legislature, that we can bring people together around real economic, human-centered decision-making. Lieutenant Governor?
Thanks, Gloria. And I would just build on that, of course. I think we have the unique position of being the state with the only divided government in the country in our legislature. And so that poses a challenge, but also I think there's some opportunity there, as Gloria mentioned, to really focus people. I would challenge us, the sort of greater us, to think about as we're making decisions at the policy level, but also across philanthropy and nonprofit organizations, and corporate America as well. if we center, when we think about an undocumented mother who is on the front lines as a frontline worker during COVID, if we center her in our decision-making and how do we make sure that she has opportunity, we will do a much better job. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat it. There are certainly leaders within our state who say anytime you talk about race or you talk about equity, you're using divisive language. And, that is something as oftentimes, and, Gloria, I know can relate to this as well, oftentimes as the only woman of color in a space or in a room or at a table, that is an easy way for individuals to be painted and then not to have to listen to the things or the voices of the people that we are bringing to the table. But through the Young Women's Initiative in our partnership with the Women's Foundation, the policies and ideas are coming directly from the folks who are most impacted. And that's how we lead when we talk about a recovery, and centering those voices who too often, I think as a recovering legislator, I would say that folks say, I have an idea, and don't ever talk to folks who may be impacted by that decision. Simply write that proposal and get it out there and put it on the table, instead of growing things in partnership. So issues around, childcare, sick leave, paid family leave. These are all things, fair wages. These are all things that are still a priority for our administration. It will be more difficult, candidly, with folks who don't necessarily, I'm going to protect your tax status, Gloria, and everyone on this call, people who don't necessarily share our values, who are leading the Senate, but that, we can't just say, and to Nicole's point, the sort of austerity language that is now coming through, we certainly have a significant budget deficit in this state due to COVID, and we will do everything we can to advocate to our partners in the congressional level and in DC to give those additional dollars to the states to be able to dig out a little bit more and support those who are most impacted. But we're going to keep moving and we're going to keep pushing. And I think about this a lot as a child advocate. I used to be the head of Children's Defense Fund here in Minnesota. That 2 years in the life of a child is a really long time. So if we wait for all the right butts to be in the seats, then we are missing a whole lot of opportunity for our littlest Minnesotans and for children and families. So now is not the time to be shy. Now is the time, I think, to as was mentioned, to be bold.
You mentioned this budget deficit, and of course, I felt this sense of relief after Saturday, but it was quickly, added to by this realization that here we are in the middle of this global pandemic, right? This is all happening with COVID hanging over us, getting worse. We're at the worst point yet that our country has faced. And it makes me think of asking Fatima a little bit about what's facing the court, because those cases don't change, pandemic or not, right? And a very basic question a lot of people ask me, what can the court do as we face these challenges from the current administration? So I would love for you just to address that, because I don't think everybody has a clear understanding. But secondly, I'd like to talk about these big issues for women, abortion coming up for the Supreme Court. And I'll leave it at that because I don't want to put too much on your plate. So if you could talk about both of those things, that would be good.
Yeah, so the first thing that I should say is, the court hears, the Supreme Court hears cases every single year, but not tons and tons of cases. So it hears maybe around 70 cases every year. We have to worry and think about both the Supreme Court, but all of the lower courts who do most of the work around the country at trial and appellate levels. And over the last almost 4 years, the Trump administration has confirmed judges at an unprecedented clip. So about a third of Court of Appeal judges were appointed by by President Trump. So that is more just for context of Obama and Bush combined. So if you're looking at the landscape and what we are facing. So one of the things that actually means in practice, among the very long list that the Biden-Harris administration have, it's going to have to be paying attention to the court. But on the Supreme Court in particular, we just are on the other side of a really tough time in our history around how we think about and confirm justices to the Supreme Court. Never before have we had a situation where a week before an election, while people were voting, you had a justice confirmed. And from the things that we know about the record of now Justice Amy Coney Barrett, there is a lot to be concerned about on a whole range of issues, including the Affordable Care Act, that case that's being argued tomorrow. But on reproductive health and access to abortion care in particular, we should be deeply concerned. And those cases are coming fast, right? Already pending at the Supreme Court are efforts to ban abortion in places like Mississippi. And so we're waiting to hear whether or not, those are cases that will be taken. But what has happened is that the state legislatures, especially in the South and Midwest, have been inspired each session by the possibility of a Supreme Court that would flout decades of law and overturn Roe, and so have passed laws that they know conflict, right? So in terms of what we do about that, some of us have been really deeply shaken by what has happened and how it is we confirm justices. And so I think there's really rich conversations to have about what does the future of our court system mean. It should be one that we can rely on and that people don't think of as this sort of political force, right? And so we need to have a serious conversation there. But in the meantime, for folks who are trying to access the care that they need, that they are entitled to, that has long been met with barrier after barrier, we have to do the work to shut down sort of state by state and resource their ability to get access to the care they need. So it's the fight ahead on this front is deep and is intense and is going to come far faster, I think, than people expect.
Nicole, do you have anything to add on that? I sort of saw you perk up a little bit, and I know your policy work engages in the issue, the reproductive issue.
Well, one of the things that Fatima raised around this being a really critical moment, and when we think about the Supreme Court and we think about Amy Coney Barrett, what we know is that these are serious threats to women's reproductive freedom and autonomy, and that has really big connections to women's economic security and well-being. These things are all connected. And so when I think about the fight ahead of us, again, really being focused in terms of, how we win and, our strategies and who we need on our side in order to be able to do that. What I'm hoping is that we're going to start asking some really tough questions moving forward about, the Supreme Court makeup. I mean, how many justices do we need? Or, should there be a cap, or should, what's going to happen here? I think we'll start asking questions, or we've been asking questions, but I think now we're in a moment where we can really move on some of those questions, like the Electoral College and some of these other things, voter suppression, why were people waiting hours and hours to cast a ballot? And, these are all questions that I think in this moment we need to take seriously, and they don't become rhetorical or they fall by the wayside, but really making them and centering those questions and joining with partners in the field, and so that we can get these questions answered and these issues resolved, or we'll find ourselves in the same place, many of these issues unresolved in 2 or 4 years.
One of the things that I've been interested about personally, I'd love to hear from all of you, is looking at Florida, which was called so early on in this process, and looking at the Latino vote in Florida, and really what happened there and how you sort of how you reconcile that, since such a significant portion of that vote did go to Trump.
Can I just say that in 2016, I think I was devastated, obviously, and so it's been like 1,467 days since then. And I thought 2016 was a fluke. You know, maybe people didn't understand what was at stake. They thought it was like, oh, it's so funny. Let's see what Donald Trump is going to do here. And what was crushing to me in this election was to see that people understood who this person was, and pulled the lever for him again. And that included many people like Latino voters in Florida, Black men and white women, actually. And so, you know, so in addition to thinking about why Latinos pull the vote, the lever in Florida, I'm thinking about those other demographics as well that somehow were pulled into some of the rhetoric, the sexism, the racism, internalizing some of those messages. I'm actually not, when I think about the Latino vote, I just want to be very clear that I think it's a diversity of Latino, like it's, you know, Latino is sort of this catch-all, but understanding that the politics and the history of Latinos is varied. And that I think we saw that play out in Florida, but also around the country.
Can I just add that one of the things that is newer over the last few cycles is the level and sophistication of disinformation campaigns and the level of effectiveness. And those campaigns, not just from foreign influence, domestically deployed, have on purpose targeted Latino and Black voters especially. And I think so part of it is actually figuring out the best antidote to disinformation is actually organizing in information. And sort of, I think the dissecting of what happened in South Florida will probably include who invested in and in what ways, so that communities weren't as moved by these on purpose ads and calls that you know, filled folks with lies and played to racial fears. I mean, that the other thing that we have to be okay with naming and then grappling with is that some of this is actually sort of predictable when you think about the way race has played out over our centuries and the way misogyny plays out. So there are very predictable cues. If you make people feel as if they will do worse off or they are doing worse off because of this group right here, you're gonna get a percentage of people. So there has to be an antidote to that.
It makes me think of how Minnesota played out. So this question is for Lieutenant Governor. When you look at where there was support for Trump and where there was support for Biden in that state, where does it leave you now about advancing the conversation on gender, on racial justice for women and families in your state? Also, to Fatima's point about the disinformation, we're all grappling with that.
For sure. Well, here's the good news. Women live everywhere across the state of Minnesota. And so we're gonna meet them where they're at. And I think that there's also, you know, you see in this state that, you know, clearly the urban core is going one way, but then there's a story, the greater Minnesota goes another way, but it's deeper than that. So if you look in greater Minnesota, you will find pockets of, I would say, you know, of blue voters. And I'll just name that here. Oftentimes in reservation communities, we have 11 reservations here in the state of Minnesota, a robust urban Indian community as well. The Native vote turned out this time around, and that is something that we're seeing building momentum every election cycle. And we also have a pretty significant group of immigrants and refugees that are also make up greater Minnesota. So when we're talking about who those voters are or how are we talking to them, I don't ever let us like seed ground that somehow there aren't BIPOC folks who are also living outside of the Twin Cities metro area, we're everywhere, you know, and I think that's an important thing to remember. You know, I also think that, you know, as we're talking about issues of gender, like we just have to keep talking about it. And, you know, and keep showing up. And as we look at each electoral cycle, just even here in the House and in the Senate, we grew our People of Color and Indigenous Caucus, of which I was a founder along with Congresswoman Omar when we were in the legislature, that it keeps growing. And there's a significant block of women and women of color in particular who are now going to be the folks who are, you know, deciding how do we do bonding? Where are we making investments? You know, and I think that is now the way that we focus on how our power as women is evolving, that we're at the table and now we're starting to, you know, push the direction of the agenda. And that to me is really exciting and something that we have to pay attention to. And I think when we get into these roles, what also happens is sometimes folks say like, oh, you know, she's really good friends with Representative so-and-so. Like now it's a thing. It's like, oh yeah, we do. We're in relationship with each other and we're gonna lift each other up when there are moments where this bill is really important. I wanna highlight it. I wanna, you know, amplify the voices of my sisters who are serving in elected office or in other jurisdictions, because that's how we do the work. I think it's been happening for a very long time. Men do this consistently. They call it networking. And, you know, and we are doing it because I think it's just how we care for each other and show up in leadership roles. And women have been leaders doing this work since time immemorial. It's just the rest of society, I think, is like now catching up with us. And we're also thinking about it. It's not one election and done. It's about scaffolding and being very clear about what those wins are and what those losses are, but how we keep building and keep organizing and hold that door open for other organizers, elected leaders, you know, who are coming after us, and being really intentional in how we do that work.
Thank you. I know we have time for questions coming up, and we are about to lose Fatima, so I want to thank you, Fatima. I just can't finish this conversation without giving a shout out to the many Stacey Abrams out there, and her work has been so incredible. And talk about a networker and the vice president-elect, and her line that I may be the first, but I won't be the last. That was the line of that speech, and it has been written and referred to over and over. So because I'm an optimist, I'd love to end on that and your impressions of her speech and your hopes for what she will do in her role as vice president. Fatima, we can start with you because I know we lose you soon.
Thank you. And I just have been glad to be in community with you. So sorry to have to drop off early. I will just say that one line there is when I finally had tears during her speech. It's because it was a reminder that her being there was about her and seeing that level of leadership and what that means for Black and brown women leaders around this country, but her commitment to not be the last and what that means she must carry around with her. That's when my tears started flowing. And that's when my great hope for little girls in this country who have her to look up to really broke through. So it was great to see.
Nicole?
I think it was, you know, also really great to see. And what does it mean? It means a lot to me as a woman of color leader, you know, in my own role. And so seeing her connected to this really long legacy of women work, you know, women who've been doing this work for so long, who have gone unrecognized. And so I think Kamala could have, when she didn't win the presidency or you know, could have given up. But she didn't, and she stayed in, and for me to see that, and also for my daughter to see it and understand that when she says, I won't be the last, it's a promise. And I know that this is optimism, but I also, we're ending on an optimistic note, but, some people hear it as a threat as well. So not all people embrace that. And so just being able to surround her with the energy and the love and the support that she will need in this moment is also really critically important. And the same for Stacey Abrams and all the women who are coming up and running for office or choosing to step into the public sphere, remembering that, it takes a lot of courage, but it also takes a lot of love and support from, community as well.
Gloria, Lieutenant Governor, any thoughts on that before we go to questions?
Yeah, I would just add that I was so inspired as well and viewed her remarks as an invitation to all of us as leaders to continue to be those connectors, propping each other up, preparing each other for future opportunities. And I really appreciated that she also gave kudos to the shoulders that she's been standing on as well, and really honoring the sacrifices that other women leaders have been making, whether we knew them or not, from our parents to our teachers and the folks who have encouraged us along the way. And I think going forward, the opportunity is to, again, be that bridge and help each other see that our well-being is inextricably connected. And I think the overriding narrative has been that if we're going to lift up a certain group of folks, that we're going to do it to the detriment of the people in power right now. And I think that we need to change that, and we can.
And I just really want to lift up what Nicole said about surrounding her with energy and light. And it's really hard to be the first. And I absolutely speak from personal experience. Our sister Kamala is going to be walking into a system that was not created by her or for her or with her in mind. And we, need to hold leadership accountable and just be honest about what it actually took for her to get there, and how I don't want more BIPOC kiddos to be like, that's scary, right? Your own community does not take care of you or lift you up if you take a risk. That's a really dangerous message to send. And so I think that those are the things that we just, as women in this movement, have to just hold. We can hold both of those things. There may be things that Joe Biden does, and I'm like, I don't like that so much, right? Or there may be things that, Vice President Harris has to do that I don't like so much either, but just holding space for her to be in that leadership role, I think becomes really important. And then I'll just say, this is the quote, and I wrote it down because it was the moment when the tears came, and I could take a deep breath for the first time in what felt like 4 years. I'm thinking about the generations of women, Black women, Asian, white, Latina, Native American women who throughout our nation's history have paved the way for this moment, who fought and sacrificed so much for equality, liberty, and justice for all. That's it. And she's carrying that, and we need to carry her.
Well said. Thank you guys so much. I'm just taking in everything that you said, and it's been so moving. I appreciate your presence here, each of you so much. So thank you. We will go to questions now. And if I'm correct, Roselande will help us sort of organize those. Hi, now I see you.
Hi, thank you, Gloria. Thank you for a wonderful panel, you all. My name is Roselande. I'm the program associate for the Aspen Institute Forum on Women and Girls. Everyone's really live in the conversation, chats on Facebook, and really engaged in the conversation. Please use hashtag powering forward to continue sharing and elevating this conversation with your folks. And now we're going to move into Q&A, which we have really interesting questions. Particularly, I'd like to start around as we talk about the power of BIPOC leaders, particularly Black women, Latinx women, Indigenous folks. They're constantly given the role, or take on the role rather, to save this country, for lack of better words, right? To enforce change. In order to really reckon with the systemic racism that we're all dealing with, one of the questions that someone's posed is, what is the path for healing and restoration right now? As we continue to do this work, as we're holding Kamala Harris at this moment, how are we holding each other?
Well, for me, it's really about staying in community with people who show up for me and who are supportive. I actually don't have a lot of time and energy for convincing people of my humanity. So I'm not here for the conversations with Trump supporters or people who are perpetrators of systemic violence against me and my communities. It's just not where I want to put my time and energy. So really channeling my energy and resources, in ways that I think are constructive and that move us forward. That said, I do think there's some work to be done with those folks, but it's not by people of color. It's not women of color. It's not my work. And so, and I think that hasn't really been said loud and clear. At least in 2016, it was assumed that it was all of our work. And I'm here to say that I don't think that is the case. And so I'm being really honest about who needs to carry that weight. I think will help us untangle some of this, and also allow leaders of color to be in their leadership, to think about, their communities really intentionally. That's what needs to happen. And also, be putting forth these really great ideas, not sort of grappling with, why don't you see me as human? So so that's what I think.
Thank you, Nicole. That's terrific. And I think to build on that, I think part of the path to healing and restoration of women of color who have been leading is to acknowledge the leadership that they have been providing, to really see and thank them for the work that they have been doing, and then to continue to yield where we have power, yield to our sisters to be at the table with us to help shape the solutions and the ideas going forward. So I do think there's a recognition that for far too long, we've all been seeped in a culture and a narrative that we have just been ignorant to and not really paid as much attention to. And now we have an opportunity to really educate ourselves and see how systemic racism has impacted all of us. And then we all need to be really vigilant in becoming the people that we want to be and creating the world that we want to see for the future. So I think just acknowledging that will be a part of the healing, but it will take time.
Yeah, and I'd like to add into both Nicole and Gloria's comments, and also when the Lieutenant Governor said just so clearly, like the weight of being the first, and that's just like at an individual level for you, Lieutenant Governor, Vice President Harris, we as a country have yet to be a first pluralistic democracy. Yet to be the democracy that is fully reflective, defined by and of all of the people. And so when I think about the future that we have yet to realize as a country, how we are able from our most internal examination to the systemic and structural, and really the call for white women to really go down that path within their individual hearts, within their individual actions, from the most, how am I parenting, to literally, how am I entering a room? And what, as we think about the weight of the global pandemic, which has been completely inequitable, when we think about the weight of everything up the food chain, I really call to white women to enter in this fully with your full heart and also your full power, and think about the ways that we shift, share, grow power, and what are hard conversations, or might be new conversations, but to build that muscle, because it is the work of white women to be also talking to other white women and white families and so forth, as we're all moving forward together. But we need to be eyes wide open about the opportunity ahead, and also realize that will be liberating. That will also move us all forward.
Thank you for that. And building off of that, one of the questions from the audience was, how are we thinking about, in the reality of the different demographics of who voted for who, white women in particular, how are we thinking of, what does it look like for there to be a bipartisan, is there a bipartisan, sorry for the noise, is there a bipartisan coalition that you have seen is working and actually having concrete conversations and solutions? And if so, what does that look like?
It's getting harder to have those conversations, I think. And I do want to just lift up the what was just shared on this previous question. I appreciate all of it. And we each have a role to play. And I think it's important for us to be in those roles. But I would say, you know, there are, we've really gotten away, I think, from building relationships with folks across the aisle. And I'm just speaking as an elected leader, that has become so much more difficult. And even with the pandemic, right, before it used to be like, oh, there's some folks who are going to go get a beer, right? Like that can't happen anymore even. And so, or like, you shouldn't be doing that, y'all. But you know, I think that becomes even more difficult. One of the people though, that I would just like to lift up here in Minnesota is former Senate Majority Leader of the GOP here in this state, Amy Koch. She has done a very good job, I think, of working with folks from all different political parties, but in particular, focusing on the need to build power with women in this state. And so I think that has been something that has given me a little hope. We still can disagree on a whole host of policy issues, but I know that she will have the back of women in leadership at all times. And so I think part of it is up to us to also model what that can look like in sort of a public way. But it absolutely is becoming harder and harder. And I think, Nicole, is just back to your point of like, we can't hang out if you don't see my humanity, right? And my just ability to exist as I do. And so that, I think those are the choices right now that I think we also have to make for ourselves. When do I say enough is enough? And when do I say this is a relationship or this is an opportunity with someone who I may not see eye to eye with politically that is worth pursuing? But I would also say, and not just because we're on here with Anne, I think the Rodell Fellowship is also that opportunity to find those relationships, and folks like the Lieutenant Governor of Iowa. We don't agree on anything politically, but it's been helpful as we've navigated through COVID to be able to call on one another. So it I think it's proceeding with caution through some of these conversations, but they're important to have.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And with that, I will pass it to Gloria Riviera to close this out.
Again, I just appreciate all of you so much for what you shared. I love that you ended with that idea of, if you don't see me and my humanity, we can't walk forward together, that has to be a starting point. I hold on to that. As I said at the beginning, I am an incurable optimist, even during the last 4 years. And I feel that very much now. So I want to thank you for all the work that you all do. It's so important. And as someone in the media, I would just say that idea of working across the aisle, we have a lot of work to do in the media. I've grown up in this business, and we used to have robust debates over email between reporters who had different views. And that doesn't happen as much anymore. And it needs to. We need to be as diverse politically in newsrooms as we hope to be outside of them, and at ease with that diversity, and embrace the humanity of our colleagues. So on that note, I want to thank all of you. It's been such an honor to be involved in this discussion. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
so much.
everybody.
We're honored to be
Power
with you.
forward.
Thank you, everybody.